LeBron takes the snap and fades back to pass. Here comes the rush. Oh, he's sacked!
The other known example of the hooked X is found in a guy that we're all very familiar with. And as far as I know, I'm the first person, and Dick, to point this out. He has the hooked X in his coded sigla that appears after he came back from the New World. Now you'll notice that, you see all those dots? If you look at those two siglas, they're not the same, are they? Remember the dots we talked about in the runestone? Now, I don't know if there's a connection here or not, but again, more beer cans, I guess, huh? Interestingly enough, somebody talked about, I don't remember now, that I think it was you, Martin, that said Columbus had the Templar cross on his sails. Well, actually, it's the Knight of Christ sails, which is the order that was founded after the Templars were put down in 1307. Actually, they weren't founded, they just changed their name and went on as usual. And their main seed was at Tomar in Portugal. And you can see the Templar cross to the left, or one version of it, and the Knight of Christ crossed on the right. So we've got a connection here with the Knights of Christ, apparently, with Columbus. And I know that there's people out there who know Manuel Luciano da Silva, who is absolutely convinced that Columbus was a Portuguese. And I think he's probably right. And certainly was a member of the Knights of Christ. His father-in-law was a Grand Master with the Knights of Christ. He absolutely had a map, in my opinion, and I think he knew exactly where he was going. Let's talk about some of the facts. The KRS and Spirit Pond are consistent with the medieval runic record. In other words, there's no reason to believe they're not absolutely genuine. It has the hooked X being used for the A sound, and clearly this is the connection that ties it to the Kensington runestone, in my opinion. But there's other information, and I'll go through the translation in a second here. This is the back side of the stone. There are 16 lines total, very long inscription. There are pentatic numbers, just like the Kensington runestone. As far as the translation goes, it appears to be a ship's log that, or a report that includes several names either of ships or people's names, or perhaps both, we don't know. There are 3 pedantic numbers. The number 11 appears twice, the number 12, and the number 17 appears twice, and there are 3 Arabic 10s. All these numbers are used on the Kensington runestone. Unfortunately, because there are not enough word separators, and the reason they probably did this is because many of the phrases were probably common phrases. Whoever the author was of this inscription, probably another Cistercian monk, didn't put in enough word separators really to make definitive translation possible. So I'm not even going to try, and unfortunately many people think they have it translated. I don't believe they're ever going to be able to have it figured out all the way, simply because we just don't know where to separate the runes into words. And there are 3 Easter table dates on this stone. Now, the first analysis that was done by Professor Einar Haugen. I think he was from Harvard University. And one of the first things he said was that the date on this stone, if you look, you can see the word H-A-R is air, year. And then you see these 2 Arabic 10s. And he said that's the year 1010. Well, if it's 1010, he said, there's many words that are very clearly on here, and some of the language can be interpreted, but he said, this is not consistent with this time period. This is much later. And he said, therefore, it must be a hoax. Well, what Einar Haugen did not understand, and nobody's really understood very well, is the use of the Easter table dating method, which we talked about yesterday. Now, when Dick Nielsen looked at this, he said, no, this is year 10th column, 10th row. And then we see what looks to be, in his mind, and I agree with him, 3 U ruins immediately afterward. I can tell you there isn't any word in Old or Modern Swedish that's spelled U. I know it looks like an M, but it's a ligature ruin where they're tied together. It's called a bin ruin. Well, a triple confirmation code would be consistent with the Cistercians, a Cistercian author, and certainly a Templar author. It's confirmed 3 times. When we go to the Easter table, if we go to the 10th column and down to the 10th row, you go across, again, this has been converted to numbers and letter. B is the second letter in the runic alphabet, F, U, thorn, O, R, K, and so forth. And you can see it's the letter U. So that's a confirmation that 1401 is the correct date. By the way, that column, the years are 1392 to 1419, and on the 10th row, that's 1401. There's another date at the end of the the front side of the inscription, year 10th column, 2 ones is 11. So that's 10th column, 11th row, that would be 1402. Now, these are some really amazing features. And if you look, you'll see there's little bars over these runes. That's an I rune, that's a T rune. Here's an N rune, and then we have a G or a K rune with.
Hello. Years ago, quite a few years ago, I made a video about this subject. It was called something like Templars, yesterday, today, and tomorrow, something like that. But many of you did not see it, and some of you already forgot. Anyway, so I decided to make this 1 or 2 episodes about this, just to explain something once and for all, to you, or to the world. The difference between a real Templar, a fake Templar, a Templar Freemason is very different. On the internet, go everywhere, they're always associating the Templar Knights, or if you're gonna call it the Knights Templar, with the Freemasons, and actually there's nothing to do one thing with the other, at least not the way you're thinking. You see, in 1307, when the Templars were betrayed, persecuted, tortured, killed by the Pope and Prince Philip of France, many escaped, and I already showed you where they went. They went to Tomare, Portugal, my hometown. It was a small town at the time, had a little castle. The king of Portugal was a Templar knight. That's why I told them, come here, I'll give you a town for you to live in. It's yours, all the land, everything. And so all the Templars that survived that persecution came from all corners of Europe to Tomar. Those are the real Templars. Those Templars stayed there. They made the castle much bigger, turned into a convent. From there, a couple of 100 years later, that's where all the Portuguese discoveries started from. The discoveries, not the slavery part. That was after. The discoveries, the Portuguese, so-called Portuguese discoveries. Portugal became the biggest empire in the world at the time. Then Spain became the biggest empire in the world too. They divided the world in 2. But those are the real Templars, the ones that moved to Tomare after 1307. And like I told you, some left from La Rochelle in France, where I was there 5 years ago, and I showed you some photos. It's all connected. Over time, in Tomare, the Knights Templar tradition started, of course. The whole thing was about Templars. It was their land, the whole town, everything. The king gave them. Everything, including people's houses that were there. But the Templars gave the people their houses back. kept a bunch of land, the castle, of course, and there's many other things there that you don't know, underground, when they all talk about it. Anyway, like I was saying, that the Templar tradition, Tomar became associated with the Knights Templar because Tomar became the capital of the Knights Templar in the world. And so, many people there, started associating with the Templars. They have Templar festivals, Templars this. If you go there now, even the sidewalks have Templar crosses, the hotels are hotel of the Templars. Everything is about Templars there. Everything. Restaurants, everything. Until now. Later, much later, in the 1600s, people in Tomar who had nothing to do with the Templars, because they were not descendants from the Templars, they were just locals, or people that lived in nearby villages and moved to Tomar, People from around the area started to call themselves Templars and knighting themselves with a sword. Who are these people? Lawyers, doctors, artists, whomever reached some kind of recognition in their field. Doctors, lawyers, those people. And they started to call themselves Templars, Knights Templar, and doing the ceremonies and the night, and they walk around town showing everybody that they're Knights Templar, but they're not. The only real Knights Templar are the descendants of the original Knights Templar that moved there after 1307. All these other ones are just fanboys, who like to feel special, and because they were born in Tomar or around Tomar, they think they deserve to be called Templars too, because they are from the area. But they're not. It's just showboat, it's show business. It's just for festivals and to have a Templar symbol here, but they're not Templars. They don't know the secrets of the Templars. They don't know anything about the Templars. They don't know the people. They are not in the know. They don't know anything about it. They don't know anything about Caristus. Nothing. It's just people that like to feel special. Some of those, or most of those, are Freemasons. Okay? Now, the Freemasons, they didn't show up in the 1700s, like they say in the books. They're much older. But they never used any Templars symbols or signs or traditions or rituals or nothing. That came later. More like an insult than anything else. And then, first it was an insult to use our symbols, the Templar symbols, even Azasian symbols. They started using our symbols, just like a slap on the face. And then over time, it became like normal. Because when one generation, another generation, then they just used the Templar symbols and some rituals as part of their freaky cult, because it became the norm. But they are not Templars. They were never associated with the real Templars. The Freemasons were never associated with the real Templars. They're associated with these other so-called Templars. And they also used symbols of the Templars that came hundreds of years after the real Templars arrived in Tomar, and they're still there. And if you go to Tomar, if you go there a few decades ago, the population was 30,000. You go there now, it's still 30,000. It doesn't change much. There was a lot of possibilities that the government wanted to invest there years ago. Some 40 years ago, wanted to build a highway right by Tomar, and the Templars said, no, we don't want any highways here. Every town and everybody always wants progress, more factories, more highways, not there. Now they do, because the European Union and other things, they have a highway that passes nearby. But at that time they were rejecting everything. They didn't want any foreigners, or strangers to move in there and start poking around. our town, our city. But see, this is the difference between real Templars. Real Knights Templars are the ones who arrived there after 1307 and their descendants, like me and others. They're still there. Then there's the fake Templars, which are these doctors and lawyers that knight themselves because it's part of the tradition of the city, and they decide to create their own little Templar group. Some of those are Freemasons, probably most of them. And then there are the Freemasons who, hundreds of years later, start adopting Templar symbols. First was just as a slap on the face, provocation, and then over time, because they kept on doing it, became the norm among the Freemasons to use Templar, some rituals, and some ritual concerning prayers and other things, symbols, and many other things. Freemasons have nothing to do with the real Templars, only with the fake Templars. So, don't get confused, ever. More to come. Cheers.
Come in. But within the walls of that prison, where up to 70 Templar Knights were imprisoned, they knew at that point they would never see their freedom again.
And you can see lots of evidence of how they passed their time, which was by making carvings in the walls to sustain them spiritually.
And for those of you who think that the Inquisition is something from the past, I've got bad news for you. It still exists to this day.
Really?
Under the rather euphemistic title of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. And it's still a disciplinarian organisation within the church that excommunicated a very dearly beloved colleague of mine called Matthew Fox, and was until very recently run by Cardinal Ratzinger, who was known as God's Rottweiler. And while Cardinal in charge of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, he excommunicated more theologians in that 20 or 30 year period than had been excommunicated in the previous 3 centuries. So don't tell me it's gone away, it's still there.
Oh, Holy Father.
Yes.
Well, that's a history of the Cathars, and we can see why the Catholic Church wanted rid of them. One, because they were obviously doing a much better job with the local people than themselves. Why are the Knights Templar always involved in stories and tales of the Cathars and many of the modern day fictions, such as the Da Vinci Code?
Oh, good luck. Have you got a year?
No, we've got another 40 minutes or so.
The Knights Templar, a name redolent with mystery and intrigue, founded in very mysterious circumstances at a date that no true historian can ever agree on. Contemporary historians at the time of the foundation, or the alleged time of the foundation of the Knights Templar, placed their foundation at any time from 1105 to 1119. There is a general consensus, which seems almost without foundation, that they were founded in 1118, 1119. And that was obviously based on the work of William of Tyre, an archbishop who didn't like the Templars incident much very well, and who was writing some 70 years after the event. But the contemporary writers placed the foundation very much earlier. What can be established is they're the result of a conspiracy mounted by the Rexdales families, mainly centred on the county of Champagne and the district we will now call Flanders, the Royal House of Flanders. Ostensibly founded to protect the pilgrims for the Holy Land, in actual fact they were trying to reclaim what they thought was their ancient and rightful patrimony, namely the land of Palestine. They were incredibly brave warriors. They had military discipline that was incomparable at the time. They were the first standing army in Europe since the fall of the Roman Empire. Incredibly brave, strategically inept, skilled diplomatists who made various treaties with the Muslims, and strangely from the Christian perspective kept them.
Yes.
The Muslims never broke a treaty. The Christians were superb at it. They're well practiced. And it was their strategic ineptitude, or that of their Grand Master, Jawad IV, which led to the disastrous defeat at the Battle of the Horns of Hattin, and ultimately to the loss of the Holy Land. A very headstrong and rash man who carries on his shoulders an enormous responsibility.
Yes.
Then, with the fall of the Holy Land, the Templars apparently lost their complete raison d'etre and started to develop facilities and skills that they'd well established over their previous 200 years of history, because they weren't just warrior knights. They were landowners big time. They owned properties that stretched from the Baltic to the Mediterranean, from the Atlantic to the Bosphorus. They owned vineyards, they owned farms, they owned quarries, they owned flour mills, they owned shipping.
Yeah.
Not only to transport their goods and services to the Holy Land, but also pilgrims. They were also in the export business. They would transfer wine from one country to another. Because of their expertise in transferring money from all their commercial enterprises in Europe, which only had one ultimate aim, to finance the work in the Holy Land, they became experts in the transfer of funds. They adopted a Muslim idea which they pinched from the Sufis called the note of hand. They were the precursors of the modern day travel industry, the package tour business, arranging pilgrimages, group pilgrimages from one place to another. They invented the 12th century equivalent of the credit card. If you were going on a long pilgrimage, you would go to your local Templar commandery and deposit a sum of money and get a coded chit.
So you get a master's card?
Yeah, almost. But except it was a coded letter, and you presented this to the Templar commander of every town you stopped in, and he dispersed the monies to your hotel keeper and gave alms to the church of your choice, recoded your chit, and you took it on. And when you returned, if you survived that long, you handed it back to the original issuer, and you would either get a bill or the change.
The purpose of the Templars seems to have altered, therefore, from the start, of, you know, the reclamation of the land that you claim that they believed was theirs, Palestine.
Well, their purpose was, first of all, to retain their patrimony, but also to spread the benefits of their knowledge in the communities in which they moved. Just like, in a sense, the Cathars.
Their knowledge. This
their
is
knowledge.
Key point.
Here we go, you see. They were founded by a group of families called Rex Deus who had preserved the original Gnostic teachings of Jesus.
These are the real Da Vinci Code people.
Yes. And if you trace that type of teaching back to ancient Egypt, it was the first time we've got it really well documented, and it goes back beyond that again into Zoroastrianism and possibly into Babylon. But in Egypt we have the documentation. The hereditary priestly caste and the royal house of Egypt, who were part of there, had immense privileges. But they also had access to spiritual knowledge, or gnosis, the benefits of which they did not use for themselves, they used for the benefit of the entire country. So the Egyptian people, for example, had a health service which was unrivaled. They were doing complex brain surgery and surviving it 3 millennia before we were able to develop it in Europe. They had building skills of incomparable standards. Their knowledge of science and of nature was beyond belief. And yet they're regarded somehow as primitive. And they were sharing that knowledge for the benefit of all. And wherever you get true Gnosticism operating, whether through one of the brotherhoods or anything else, it is not just for the people concerned. They have a sacred duty to spread it laterally into society.
The circumstantial evidence suggests Columbus was likely a member of the Knights of Christ. I'm not saying he was, but I'm saying the evidence suggests he was. The Larson papers contain a secret runic alphabet linked to an 1880s Swedish Masonic Tailors Guild. The X symbol for A was found being used as an alphabetical code. You saw that yesterday, circa 1450. And I want you to look at these dates. other than the Larson papers, they're all around a similar time period. These are facts. The Cistercians founded the Knights Templar in 1128. The Templars used codes extensively for financial transactions. The Templars had the finest sailing fleet in the world by 1300. Nobody argues with this point, at least not that I'm aware of. The Knights Templar were put down in 1307, and 80 to 90% of the Templar order, along with their ships, disappeared into history. And I've had a lot of historians I've talked to said, they were done after that. Well, logic tells me that if you've got 90 to 80% of your group that's out there somewhere, they don't just die off and disappear. I don't believe that.
People have some very bizarre ideas about spirituality. There's black and white, good and bad. Not so. There is spirituality or there is an absence of it. Yeah. Spiritual knowledge and power can be used for good or ill, depending on the inclination of the person who possesses it. Mm-hmm. And this is why the ancients, in their wisdom, had such strict regimes for allowing novices to enter on the spiritual path, and such a prolonged period, usually 7 or 8 years or more, of preparation before they're allowed to enter. Not only because of the dangers inherent in the spiritual path itself, but to sort out the sheep from the goats before they got any power. Yeah. They didn't want evil people attaining power. Yes. So Gnosticism is part of the key. And people claim, mistakenly, that, for example, Freemasonry sprang from the Templars. Not so. There is no direct link whatsoever. And people claim, mistakenly, that, for example, Freemasonry sprang from the Templars. Not so. There is no direct link whatsoever. And people claim, mistakenly, that, for example, Freemasonry sprang from the Templars. Not so. There is no direct link whatsoever.
The only real Knights Templar are the descendants of the original Knights Templar that moved there after 1307. All these other ones are just fanboys, you know, who like to feel special. And because they were born in Tumar or around Tumar, they think they deserve to be called Templars too, because they are from the area. Yeah, but they're not. It's just showboat, you know, it's show business. It's just for festivals and to have a Templar symbol here, but they're not Templars. They don't know the secrets of the Templars. They don't know anything about the Templars. They don't know the people. They are not in the know. They don't know anything about it. They don't know anything about Caristus. Nothing. It's just people that like to feel special. Some of those, or most of those, are Freemasons. Okay? Now, the Freemasons, they didn't show up in the 1700s, like they say in the books. They're much older. Much older. But they never used any Templars, symbols or signs or traditions or rituals or nothing. That came later.
And people claim, mistakenly, that, for example, Freemasonry sprang from the Templars. Not so. There is no direct link whatsoever.
Well, logic tells me that if you've got 90 to 80% of your group that's out there somewhere, they don't just die off and disappear. I don't believe that. Okay, now we're going to do the same thing we did before. We're going to veer from the facts and we're going to start doing some speculation. And once again, it's going to be based on sound historical facts. I'm going to tell you what my interpretations are of the data that I presented and other data. All 5 runestones with the hooked X and Columbus's sigla are medieval. Those happen to be facts, I think, but the Narragansett is speculation on my part. The hooked X symbol appears to be an alphabetical code secretly used by the medieval Cistercians and Knights Templar. That's what I think it is. The 1885 Masonic Guild documents appear to link the hooked X to Freemasonry. And the hooked X likely represents important ideological symbolism. Why? The reason is because it's not found in the record, the runic record. So what is it? Logic told me if these stones are real, then there has to be an explanation for it, right? And if it's not in the record, then maybe there's something else. And this is where I had to switch over to the other side of my brain. And I have to tell you, I struggled with it. But I've had some people who helped me. And when I started talking about the hooked X in my lectures, people started to wait until I was finished and everybody left, and they approached me. They were Freemasons. And they said, I remember the first one, and I went up, he came up to me and I said, "Are you a Freemason?" He said, "Yes." I go, "How did I do?" He goes, "Pretty good." And I said, "Boy, oh boy, I'm really fumbling in the dark." And he said, "Well," he said, "maybe we can give you some help." And they did. Well,